Alright, so hello everyone, Shane's Games here. We're going to be reviewing another YouTube video as we always do pretty much. This one time it's not going to be a powerlifting video, it's going to actually be a how hard should you train video by Jeff Nippard. Jeff Nippard's a big guy in the fitness scene, everybody pretty much knows who he is. So yeah, he interviews people asking them how hard they think you should train. They all have different opinions, but they seem to be similar enough with the general message of like you should probably train pretty hard, but I think they differ in some interesting ways, and we're just going to talk about that in this video probably.
Dr. Mike Israetel, and he explained to me his basic philosophy that even though it might be tempting, we shouldn't always train as hard as possible because we need to consider how fatigue from going too hard might impact future training sessions.
A lot of folks will say you got to train hard enough to make gains, and that's true. That's true as far as it goes. If it doesn't go far enough, I think we could do a little bit better. We can say you have to train hard enough to make gains, but not so hard that your next workout suffers and it becomes a situation where your next workout is unable to make you gains because you went too hard.
Then throughout our chat, he emphasized that it ultimately depends on where you are in your training phase or mesocycle, where at the beginning of a 4 to 8 week training program, you should train less hard and with lower volumes. But then toward the end of a mesocycle, you should train very hard and with more volume.
And
Alright, so generally I kind of agree with this. However, I would say for the 1 week, the beginning of the mesocycle would be like extremely small, like a few days, and then you should be going into the hardest training you should be able to do effectively. So your mesocycle should probably be based around two things: a competition or a deload week, right? Your mesocycles and mesocycles, I believe they're called, generally should be based around those two things. I believe that after a deload, you're just trying to ramp back up into your workout. So 2 days, 3 days should be enough to ramp up into your full workout. But whenever you don't train as hard as you can, you're always going to be leaving something on the table. And sometimes it's fine to leave stuff on the table, because leaving reps on the table, leaving reps at the gym, however you want to say it, could allow you to train harder the next day. However, repetition of certain actions means that recovery is also rapidly increased. So we can see this with Bulgarian training, for example. So the big advantage of Bulgarian training is they train so much that allowed them to train more, right? So Bulgarian training is generally you train like the snatch and the clean and jerk mainly, and squats, I believe. It was a weightlifting style of training, and you train that like every day, potentially even multiple times a day. Particularly trying to build up towards a weightlifting meet, right? So the big advantage of this was they didn't get fatigued as much because their bodies were so used to doing the same movement that they felt barely any fatigue. We can see this in calves, right? So a lot of people say it's very difficult for them to build their calves. Why is this? Because the calves are experience a lot of the same stimulus all throughout your life, right? You're always walking on your calves, you're always applying the same stimulus. So in order to, it's the same for the legs to an extent, but mainly calves. So you're going to have to apply significantly increased weight, tension, stretch, whatever it may be, on your calves in order to get them growing, right? So we expand this out to general movements, expand this out to like squatting or deadlifting or benching for a powerlifter like me, for example. So if you were to squat, bench and deadlift every day, your recovery from each one of those movements is going to be, this depends on rep range as well, and set amount to an extent. But the more you do those lifts, the faster you're going to recover. I right now am at a point doing a pseudo Bulgarian style of training where I can recover from an extremely intense, let's say chest workout, for example. I'm talking like RPE 10, like I literally couldn't do, and that you can give me like a million pounds, $1 million, I wouldn't be able to do another rep, right? I can recover from that in about 2 days or so because I do it so regularly. Because I bench every day, so 6 days a week. I squat 6 days a week. I deadlift 6 days a week, right? I can recover from these extremely quickly. So, to that extent, I would say you can go heavy on these exercises if you do them a lot, because it reduces the amount of time you need to recover, and also reduces the likelihood of you getting injured, right? Because you're doing these things more and more and more. The specific tendons which are involved in this are getting stronger. The or like the specific, yeah.
And we can get a little bit more technical as to what it means to train hard enough to make gains. You want to start at a load that gets you, somewhere close to 3 reps in reserve. And then as far as volume, you want to start towards the lower end of the number of
I
sets.
think 3 reps in reserve is always too much. But this is just me. Like, if you want to become like the best in a specific sport, you can't do 3 reps in reserve ever unless it's a deload week. Like 3 reps in reserve is a deload for me, unless I break something or injure something.
That's probably a volume where, you get notably fatigued in the target muscle. You don't want to leave the gym and be like, my biceps feel 100% fine. That's probably not stimulative. I wouldn't bet that it's stimulative. You probably want to get a small pump. If you get a massive pump, it'll probably come with a ton of soreness at the front end you may not want. But no pump at all is curious, unlikely to stimulate hypertrophy, at least.
Here's another thing, very quickly. I think one of the most important things in all of this is recovery. I think what is equally as important as how hard you train is how, let's say, hard you recover. Having a massage gun, doing deep muscle, deep muscle massage, as we see with like foam rollers and stuff like that. Having cold showers potentially, or warm showers depending on what sort of exercise you do. Doing all these different things, general stretches, general warm-ups, cool-downs, all this sorts of stuff, right? Is almost as important, or maybe even more important than the workout itself, because working out increases the total, let's say for powerlifting, strength you're able to gain, over stretching, general recovery techniques, increase the amount of times you're able to lift heavy, right? So it's frequency versus intensity, let's say. You want to keep both of these up. So not having a general recovery scheme will probably be detrimental to your overall strength gains, or 100% be.
Nearly optimally, and you probably want to get maybe like a little bit sore, at most a little bit sore. You start roughly 3 reps in reserve, and then every week after that during your accumulation phase you're going to increase something a little bit. It's some combination of increasing load and or reps, more or less every session that you do the same thing every week, and you want to make sure the load and rep increases maintain or reduce RIR by roughly 1 each week. So that means you could potentially do your next week 3 RIR, your next week 3 RIR, next week 3 RIR. That's a fine way to train. But if your next week is 2 RIR, and then the one after is 1 RIR, and then the one after is 0 RIR, that's totally cool too. What you don't want is a situation in which you're not adding enough reps and load each week, and what ends up happening is your reps in reserve actually go up.
The second one, the one where it's going downwards here, is obviously beneficial. Apart from, I don't know what happens at the last week here. Is this a deload or something? I'm not too sure, but.
So you don't want to start a 3 RIR and then end up at 4 RIR the next week and 5 reps in reserve the week after, because you're actually training easier and easier each week relative to your body's capabilities and outside of the realm of where best adaptations are had. When your repetition strength flatlines and then takes a dip, you've reached your maximum recoverable volume for that last week. That means adding any more volume or even staying at that volume is going to be more and more deleterious to gains, and it's probably not a good idea to keep going. Your fatigue is very high. You want to take a deload, decrease all that fatigue, and then come back and realign everything just like you started. 3 RIR again, lower end of volumes again, and then progress through, and that's how training sort of naturally builds itself.
Now, later in our conversation, I asked Mike exactly why he doesn't like to take any sets to failure early on in a training phase. So what's the downside of just taking, say, the last set of each exercise to failure, even in the first week of a program? And it led to a very informative discussion.
If you're going to have failure as making the biggest difference in your growth, it's almost certainly true that you don't need that difference at the beginning of a mesocycle. You just had a deload. You just traded in some exercises and traded in some rep ranges for some others. The novelty is so great, your sensitivity for growth is so great.
If your sensitivity for growth is so great, surely you'd want to push it to the maximum. Surely you wouldn't just want to do the minimum to increase size, increase strength, or whatever it may be. Surely you want to do the maximum to maximize this sensitivity which you have, right? I don't really know what he means by it's not necessary to do it. Like, if you train harder, you will elicit more growth. You may have diminishing returns, but that's for like near enough everything when it comes to training generally. But we take into account the diminishing returns. We take the diminishing returns as they come generally when it comes to powerlifting, strength training, whatever it may be.
Almost certainly get great results in the first week by going shy of failure. You just don't need to go that hard. Now, could you say the same thing about the last week? For example, if you said, now Mike, everything in the last week I ever do, I always stop at 1 RIR. I never try to go to true failure. Are there downsides to that? That I would agree with you 100%. There are hypothetical downsides. There could be some magic, especially delayed growth, especially in the advanced, that is there between that 1 and 0 RIR. So I would say in the last week, if the shit doesn't come crashing down on you like a squat or a bench, And if you have a good bench spotter, go all the way to failure is a really, really good idea to make sure you check all the boxes. I just don't understand why you would do that in week one, because you're getting great gains anyway, not having to try that hard. Now, if failure training is fun, sweet, get up. Just make sure it's not poisoning you fatigue-wise for the next session. You know, you don't want to be in a situation where you're needlessly cutting your volume and you're getting a little pings and dings and getting hurt a little bit much, and you're like, man, tell you what, I always get hurt on that stupid failure set. Why the hell am I doing it? Then if you can't justify it, I wouldn't do it then.
So for Mike, how hard you should go mainly depends on where you are in your program. Next, I spoke with IFBB Pro John Meadows, and he really emphasized that how hard you should train mostly depends on how advanced you are, with the grueling, high-intensity techniques he's most known for being most useful for helping advanced trainees break through training plateaus.
When you start training, I think we all realize that you don't have to kill yourself. You don't need to take sets to failure. You don't need a crazy high amount of...
Again, with this, I don't know what he means by like, if you're starting off and you take sets to failure, okay, so you probably shouldn't because of the injury factor, right? But other than that, like, low weight sets to failure have a relatively low injury factor. High rep ranges, low weight, generally has a low injury factor. So why not take it to failure? A lot of people don't even know. Well, a lot of beginners don't even know what failure is, right? Because they don't really know how hard they can push themselves, right? So they'll just go in the gym. They'll be like, oh yeah, this is really heavy, and then like, I don't know, you get somebody who's like slightly motivational, and then the next day they're doing twice the amount of reps, twice the amount of sets. You know, it's hard to set this stuff up for beginners. Let's see what it says for intermediate. I guess I'll be able to respond to that more.
Volume. Just by learning proper form, you just continue to get stronger and stronger. You make nice little incremental increases in strength, but that only take you so far. You know, wouldn't it be great if that's how training was all the time? You could just kind of add 10 pounds on the bar for the rest of your life, and then by the time you're 60 years old, you could bench 1,200 pounds. But that's just not how it works. So you kind of move into an intermediate stage where it's like, okay, now I feel most of these movements pretty good. It's not as easy to get as strong now. Now I'm going to add a little bit of volume. I'm going to add a little bit of intensity. The primary goal at that phase, I think, is still trying to get a little bit stronger, though. It's just because you kind of went out of that newbie gain phase, it doesn't mean all of a sudden now you don't care about progressing your lifts. You get to this advanced stage, now all of a sudden you've got to challenge your body more. So
Okay, so I don't like the whole intermediate beginner advanced thing because it's a lot more complex than that. Like, somebody could be advanced and never step foot in the gym because they trained the majority of their life for like rugby or football or whatever, maybe something like that. It could be any sport, right? They could be in the advanced section, and it depends what you're training. So like, I may be, I don't know, this is random, probably not. I may be like at the advanced level in squat, but I may only be like in the beginner level when it comes to deadlift because I haven't been deadlifting for that long, right? It's more complex than just beginner, intermediate, advanced. This also takes into account weight a lot, right? So let's say this is what I found generally. If you increase your weight a lot, you can increase the amount of weight you can pull or push. Big like surprise, right? That's obvious. However, when you cut back down, I see you can retain a fair amount of that weight which you could push or pull before, depending on how long it takes you to cut. Let's say, so I like very, very long cuts and relatively quick bulks. So let's say I was to cut for like, I don't know, for 5 months or something like that. Let's say I was to cut like 10 kg or like about 22 pounds, right? Over that time. During that time, I may actually keep the same strength or potentially even gain strength. It wouldn't be so likely for me to lose that strength. This is a very good way to slingshot yourself into higher weight brackets to gain strength and then come back down in order if you compete in a certain weight class or whatever it may be. But going on to the intermediate points which you've made here, of course your primary goal is still strength progression. Progression generally in the gym, that should be the general goal. That's like the main thing about going to the gym. So generally, yeah, volume intensity. You should always be adding intensity, whether you're beginner, intermediate, advanced. When you're advanced, maybe you just got to get more creative, like Greg says.
So some of those
Greg
techniques
set,
that we
is.
like to use, an occasional cluster set, an occasional drop set, maybe you start putting one of those in a
What is
workout. You know, going back to our chest example, now maybe you get on the machine and now maybe you do a cluster set to finish your day, or maybe you do a drop set to finish your day. Something to really challenge the muscle. I always hesitate in saying this, but I really believe it. So you're probably going to get a lot of people that get really angry at me for saying this, but I think that when you hit an advanced stage, I think you could literally use any exercises you want in any order you want, as long as those exercises work for you, as long as you just take them a certain amount of them to failure or failure and beyond. Because if you just look at muscle growth, it's mechanical tension. Okay, if you're using an exercise that gives you mechanical tension, you're probably going to grow. And that's where you see the advanced guys can sometimes use those techniques to do really, really well, in particular naturals. You know, the drug-aided guys have a lot of chemicals that can help them continue to break through plateaus, but the natural guys in particular, they can kind of sprinkle some of that stuff in. It's really good for them to continue to grow. It doesn't really matter what exercise.
I've never seen this machine. Is it like a trap bar, but only with the back? Okay. Anyway.
As long as it's one that you feel working well, and as long as you get good activation, good mechanical tension, and exhausting muscle fibers. Like if you're doing those three things, what else are you going to do to make a muscle grow? Like that's what muscle growth is. I mean, that's really kind of the crux of it. You find an exercise that works well for you, and you just push it hard.
John also emphasized the importance of form, even in advanced stages, and that training harder shouldn't come at the expense of excessive technique breakdown.
And I think it's important to continue.
I don't think it matters too much unless you're a power lifter, unless you have to compete where your form has to be perfect. It matters to an extent, but if you don't notice the form breakdown and you like video yourself or you have some pretty good it's a more complex word for mind muscle connection. It talks, I forget the word. It's like more than just muscle, like bone, your whole physiology where it's positioned, stuff like that. If you have a good connection with that, or if you know a lot about that, then you can kind of tell if your form's bad. But unless you're lifting like crazy weights, I don't think your form's going to take that hard of a hit without you knowing.
You need to work on your form. You know, you get a guy like you and I, we've been training for a long time, but even we still try to work on our form. So it doesn't mean that you all of a sudden stop thinking about your form and things like that.
Now, I also wanted to get a truly elite level athlete's viewpoint, so I spoke with 25-time world record holding powerlifter Dr. Steffi Cohen.
Yeah, let's go powerlifter.
And while she also continually emphasized how important individualization is, I think more than anyone else, she highlighted that if you want to be the best, you simply need to learn to push your limits.
So
I'm probably going to agree with Steffi the most because, well, she's a powerlifter and she tells people to train the hardest. So, as Greg Doucette did when he reviewed this video.
from my own experience, what I've seen is that the best people in the game, like great accomplishments and great athletes, come from working obsessively. Like you don't achieve greatness from casual effort. You know, never once in my entire career did I come into the gym thinking about what's the least I can do to like get by. For the most part, and this is based on what I've observed, people rarely train hard enough, and they're usually in what I call the.
That's true. I don't think people care that much, to be completely honest. Like they just go to the gym for going to the gym sake. A lot of the people which I see at the gym, some people train hard, but I wouldn't say that's a majority of people. I don't know. I see a fair amount of people training hard. I wouldn't say it's a lot of people actually. I take that back. I'll say it's a fair amount of people, but not a lot.
50% zone where they don't take themselves to like not failure, but like to an intensity that is actually challenging. Ever, rarely, and then they don't rest when they're supposed to rest. So it's like you end up being in this 50% zone where you're always half-assing all of your workouts because you're not training hard enough when you should, and you're not resting when you should. We need to push our athletes and ourselves to improve their confidence and really, really push for those adaptations so that they know how to respond to hard challenges. And this needs to be obviously done in an intelligent way.
Steffi also said that while she doesn't take every set to failure, she will run relatively lighter accumulation phases. Training to failure is still a very central aspect of her programming.
Training to failure is an integral part of strength training that, for the most part and most recently, has been underlooked. Your training should reflect the specificity of what you're trying to achieve. So if you're trying to improve your 1 rep max squat, you better be trying to train at those intensities. I'm not saying that you're going to max out every day, but you should be challenging yourself almost every training session so that you can train your nervous system and your body to respond to that, to the demands of putting something that's really, really heavy and having to move it up and down. Obviously, you go through accumulation phases as well, so it wouldn't be fair to just discard completely the idea of high volume and low intensity. I think there's a time and place for that, but once you've gone through like your 4, 6, or 8 weeks of kind of introductory period of accumulating some load and fine-tuning your movement, once that's done with, now that's go time. Like you better spend 4, 6, or 8 weeks really pushing yourself as hard as you can in those intensity ranges. Like get to 99.
How'd she do so many? That took like 10 years to come off the floor, and she's done like 6 reps with it.
100% in your 1, 2, 3,
That's
4,
impressive.
5 rep max, and really challenge yourself. So if your goal is to just train for health, forget about everything I just said. If your goal is to see how strong can you get, how big can you get, if you're really trying to test your limits, then you're gonna have to like put in some effort and some intensity.
Steffi also said that to get the most out of your training, it's important to blend wisdom from successful athletes, coaches, and the scientific literature. So next I got Dr. Eric Helms on the line as someone who did his PhD dissertation on this exact topic.
This is, I would say, one of the few constants in hypertrophy training. If you are not registering an RPE of like 6 or higher most of the time, you're probably not going to be growing very effectively. It has to be reasonably close to failure, or reasonably heavy, which kind of forces you close to failure immediately, and then do
I feel like, okay, so I'm going to skip past this one. So I feel like everything, all the main points which I had to say have already been said. I feel like Steffi Cohen really summarized it very well. So yeah, that'll be the video for today. I'll see you lot in the next video. See you.